She was smart, charming, and dangerously ambitious. In a world where women were meant to be silent and obedient, Anne Boleyn dared to rewrite the rules. She rose from the shadows of the court to the throne of England, not as a mistress, but as a queen. And for that, she paid the ultimate price. But what if her story is more than just scandal and seduction? What if Anne Boleyn was the woman who changed the course of world history forever? Long before Anne Boleyn ever set foot in the English royal court, she was already being molded by the forces of politics, culture, and ambition. Born sometime between 1501 and 1507, historians still debate the exact year, Anne was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, a rising courtier and diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard, a member of one of England's most powerful noble families. Though not royal by birth, the Boleyns were well-positioned, socially and politically. Thomas Boleyn was intelligent, fluent in several languages, and driven, traits he passed down to his daughter. But what truly set Anne apart wasn't just her lineage, it was her education. While many young noblewomen of the time were taught little more than how to run a household and be agreeable wives, Anne was sent abroad to be educated in some of the most refined courts in Europe. Around the age of 12 or 13, she was placed in the household of Margaret of Austria in the Netherlands, one of the most sophisticated courts in Europe, and one that prized intellect, diplomacy, and the arts. Margaret herself praised Anne's quick wit and manners, a rare compliment for someone so young. From there, Anne moved on to the French court, where she spent several years serving Queen Claude, wife of King Francis I. It was there that Anne absorbed the elegance, confidence, and worldly knowledge that would later set her apart in the English court. The French court was a place of poetry, philosophy, flirtation, and political intrigue, and Anne learned to navigate it all with skill. She learned to dress with style, speak fluent French, and carry herself with grace. But perhaps more importantly, she learned how power moved, subtly, quietly, behind fans and folded letters. Her time abroad shaped her into something rare for Tudor England, a woman who could speak boldly, read the classics, and hold her own in intellectual and theological debates. She was not conventionally beautiful by the standards of her time. With her dark eyes and olive skin, she was often called exotic, but there was something undeniably magnetic about her. Even before she returned to England around 1522, Anne was already someone people noticed. She was sharp, elegant, and, as history would soon show, deeply strategic. Anne returned to the English court not as a quiet lady in waiting, but as someone who knew what she wanted. And she wasn't about to let anyone, not even a king, define her story without a fight. When Anne Boleyn returned to England around 1522, she stepped into a world already brimming with courtly drama, and, as fate would have it, into the very center of it. She was appointed as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, wife of King Henry VIII. But long before Anne became the king's obsession, it was her sister, Mary Boleyn, who caught his attention. Mary, often referred to as the English Mare by the French for her promiscuity during her own time in the French court, had already developed a reputation. Not long after her marriage to William Carey, a gentleman of the king's privy chamber, she became Henry VIII's mistress. Their affair was brief but public enough to cause whispers, and possibly produced 2 illegitimate children, though Henry never acknowledged them. While Mary may have served the king's physical desires, Anne was about to challenge something much deeper: his pride, his patience, and his power. Initially, Anne was betrothed to Henry Percy, the son of the powerful Earl of Northumberland. The match was serious enough that the couple allegedly considered themselves legally bound. But the union was broken off, likely due to Cardinal Wolsey's intervention, under pressure from the king himself. Whether Henry had already taken an interest in Anne at that point is debated, but soon after, his fascination with her became undeniable. Unlike her sister, Anne refused to be seduced by the crown. When Henry VIII began his courtship, with gifts, letters, and tokens of affection, Anne did the unthinkable: she said no. She made it clear she would not be a mistress, not another discarded woman at the Tudor court. If he wanted her, it would be as queen, or not at all. This refusal only fueled Henry's obsession. He was already growing disillusioned with Catherine of Aragon, who had failed to produce a male heir after multiple pregnancies and miscarriages. Catherine's only surviving child was a daughter, Mary, not enough in Henry's eyes to secure the Tudor line. Anne, educated, charming, and fresh with European sophistication, presented a new possibility. A queen who could give him a son. A queen of his own choosing. Henry began what would become one of the most controversial and consequential courtships in English history. Between 1526 and 1533, he bombarded Anne with over a dozen passionate letters, rare historical artifacts that show the depth of his longing and frustration. In them, he calls her, "my mistress and friend," expressing his hope that one day she would become his wife. But Anne's rise wasn't just based on refusal. She understood the rules of power, and how to bend them. She kept Henry close, yet just out of reach. She positioned herself as both devout and desirable, embracing evangelical texts, engaging in theological debates, and aligning herself with reformist thinkers. Her relationship with Henry helped spark his break with the Catholic Church, a move that would reshape England forever. But in these early years, it was still a dangerous game. Many in court hated her. She was called a witch, a seductress, a usurper. But Anne was undeterred. By 1532, Henry had made up his mind. He elevated Anne to the title of Marquess of Pembroke in her own right, a title never before given to a woman without royal blood. In 1533, while still legally married to Catherine, Henry and Anne married in secret. Anne was already pregnant. She had won the crown. But the kingdom she stepped into was not a safe one, and her victory came with enemies sharpening their knives. Anne Boleyn's coronation in June 1533 was unlike any England had seen before. She was not just becoming queen, she was becoming a symbol of a new order. Crowned with St. Edward's crown, usually reserved for reigning monarchs, her elevation was meant to send a clear message: Anne wasn't just Henry's consort. She was the future, and with her came the most radical transformation England had undergone in centuries. But Anne's real power began long before the crown was placed on her head. Even before her marriage, she had wielded immense influence over Henry, not just emotionally, but intellectually and spiritually. Unlike many women of her time, Anne was not only literate, she was well-read. During her formative years in the Netherlands and at the French court, she was exposed to humanist thinkers, artists, and reformist theology. She developed a sharp mind, an appreciation for scripture, and a conviction that religious reform was not only necessary, but urgent. While Anne herself remained a Catholic in basic belief, she died professing her faith. She was deeply sympathetic to the Protestant Reformation. She championed writers like William Tyndale, whose English translation of the Bible was banned in England, and supported reformist preachers such as Thomas Cranmer, whom Henry would later appoint Archbishop of Canterbury, largely thanks to Anne's encouragement. It was Anne who put a copy of Tyndale's The Obedience of a Christian Man into Henry's hands. The book argued that kings, not the Pope, held ultimate authority over their own realms. Henry, who had once proudly defended Catholic orthodoxy and even earned the title, Defender of the Faith, from the Pope, now found theological justification for his political needs. If Rome would not annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, perhaps he didn't need Rome at all. And so, under Anne's growing influence, Henry initiated the English Reformation. He rejected papal authority, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and dissolved the ties between England and the Vatican. The Act of Supremacy in 1534 formalized this break, turning England into a sovereign spiritual entity, with the monarch at its head, a move that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. But Anne's power extended beyond religion. She was a political force. She surrounded herself with reform-minded advisors, pushed for the appointment of Protestant clergy, and advocated for educational and charitable reforms. She gave alms to the poor, supported university scholarships, and even intervened in legal cases. Foreign ambassadors, particularly from Catholic powers like Spain and France, loathed her, not only because of her role in Henry's divorce, but because of the influence she wielded in reshaping England's political alliances and religious identity. Still, much of Anne's success, and the fragility of it, hinged on one crucial factor: delivering a male heir. In September 1533, Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. It was a disappointment to many, but Anne and Henry were still hopeful. Henry consoled himself that sons would follow. After all, Catherine of Aragon had failed repeatedly to produce surviving children. Anne had time. Elizabeth, though, would one day become one of the greatest monarchs England had ever known. But in the 1530s, she was seen as a setback. Anne suffered at least 2 more miscarriages, one in 1534 and another in January 1536. That final miscarriage reportedly occurred shortly after Henry suffered a serious jousting accident, and the lost child was said to be male. For Henry, this was a devastating blow. For Anne, it was catastrophic. The very forces Anne had helped unleash, religious change, courtly ambition, and a culture of ruthless power, were beginning to close in on her. Her enemies at court, who had never accepted her, were waiting for her to falter. The king's attention was drifting elsewhere, toward a quiet, obedient lady-in-waiting named Jane Seymour. Anne Boleyn had changed the course of English history. She had reshaped the monarchy, redefined religion, and elevated the role of queenship. But even queens are not safe in Tudor England, especially ones who threaten the old order. By the way, if you've been enjoying this look into Anne Boleyn's life, we've got something really special for those of you who connect with her story. A delicate necklace inspired by Anne herself, a timeless initial letter pendant that feels personal, powerful, and elegant. You can choose your own initial, and even customize it further with a special engraving, like a name, date, or message that matters to you. It comes in silver, gold, and rose gold, so you can match it to your own style. The best part? The lovely team at Devavita is offering an exclusive 30% discount just for our viewers. This isn't a paid promotion, we're not affiliated, and we don't earn anything from it. It's simply a kind gesture for our community. You'll find the link in the description if you'd like to take a look. It's a little way to carry a piece of Anne's legacy with you. Now, let's get back to the video. By early 1536, the very court that once whispered Anne Boleyn's praises now murmured doubts, plots, and treason. The tides had shifted, and Anne, once the woman who defied a queen, unseated a religion, and dazzled a king, began to feel the chill of isolation. Her world, built on bold defiance and ambition, was cracking under the relentless weight of expectation, politics, and the brutal nature of Tudor power. The pressure to produce a male heir had always been immense. Henry VIII had broken from Rome, risked war with Spain, and waited 7 long years to marry Anne, all with the expectation that she would give him a son. But after the birth of Princess Elizabeth in 1533, Anne's subsequent pregnancies ended in heartbreak. The most devastating loss came in January 1536, when Anne miscarried a baby that, according to court reports, was a boy. The timing was cruel. It happened shortly after Henry's near-fatal jousting accident at Greenwich. As Henry lay injured, questions about succession and mortality hung heavy in the air. That miscarriage sealed Anne's fate in many ways. For Henry, it may have confirmed what he feared, that God did not bless this marriage. He began to distance himself emotionally and physically. Anne, once the object of his obsessive devotion, now found herself alone. Her enemies, who had been quietly waiting for her to fall, sprang into action. Among them was Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister. Once an ally of Anne's, Cromwell had grown wary of her influence, particularly her push for the redistribution of church wealth to charities and educational causes. Cromwell preferred the crown to claim that wealth directly. Their falling out was dangerous. In the Tudor court, ideological disagreements could easily turn fatal. Meanwhile, Henry's eye had fallen on a new woman, Jane Seymour. Demure, obedient, and unambitious, Jane was everything Anne was not, and perhaps precisely what Henry now wanted. Jane had the backing of powerful conservative factions at court, including the Seymour and Howard families. They began maneuvering behind the scenes, quietly undermining Anne's position. The rumors started slowly, then exploded. Whispers of infidelity, an unthinkable crime for a queen, began to circulate. George Boleyn, Anne's own brother, was among those implicated. So were courtiers like Henry Norris, Francis Weston, William Brereton, and a musician named Mark Smeaton. Historians widely believe these charges were fabricated or grossly exaggerated. But in a court where truth mattered less than convenience, the outcome was all but decided. Thomas Cromwell orchestrated the investigation with ruthless efficiency. Smeaton, the only accused who wasn't noble and therefore unprotected by the aristocratic code, was likely tortured into a confession. The others were arrested, interrogated, and condemned based on scant or dubious evidence. George Boleyn was accused of incest with his sister, a charge so outrageous it shocked even hardened courtiers, but one that spoke to the level of desperation, or precision, behind the case being built. Anne herself was arrested on May 2, 1536. She was taken to the Tower of London, the same place she had once entered triumphantly for her coronation. Now, she entered through the Traitor's Gate. In prison, Anne remained composed, even while clearly shaken. Her dignity in those final days struck even her enemies. She denied all charges against her, maintained her innocence, and expressed sorrow only for not having pleased the king more. According to reports, she often shifted between quiet prayer and moments of gallows humor, making light of her situation as though even she couldn't believe it had come to this. Anne Boleyn had once held the fate of England in her hands. She had unseated a queen, reshaped the monarchy, and redefined the power of a woman at court. But the very weapons she had wielded, charm, wit, intelligence, and ambition, were now turned against her. She had broken the rules. She had played a dangerous game. And in the Tudor court, no one who played that high ever walked away unscathed. Anne Boleyn's fall was not just swift, it was orchestrated with chilling precision. In the span of just 17 days, England's once most powerful woman was arrested, imprisoned, tried, and executed. It was a carefully constructed political assassination disguised as justice, and behind it were the forces she once outplayed, now emboldened and ready to destroy her. On May 2, 1536, Anne was arrested during a tennis match at Greenwich Palace. Without ceremony or clear explanation, she was taken to the Tower of London, a place she had entered just 3 years earlier for her coronation, now entered again, this time as a prisoner through the infamous Traitor's Gate. The charges against her were staggering: adultery, incest, and conspiring to murder the king. To commit adultery as a queen was not just immoral, it was treason, punishable by death. But these accusations were not only thin, they were fabricated. Anne was accused of affairs with 5 men, including her own brother, George Boleyn. The others, Sir Henry Norris, Sir Francis Weston, William Brereton, and Mark Smeaton, a court musician, were all arrested within days. The evidence was based on vague testimonies, conflicting timelines, and in some cases, outright impossibilities. Some of the alleged encounters supposedly took place when Anne was recovering from childbirth or nowhere near the accused men. Mark Smeaton was the weakest link, a commoner, unprotected by noble privilege. It's widely believed he was tortured into confessing a relationship with Anne. His confession was used as the foundation to accuse the others. Even in Tudor times, the case was flimsy. But it didn't need to be solid, it only needed to be politically useful. Behind the scenes, Thomas Cromwell, once Anne's ally, had turned against her. Their rift, over church funds, foreign policy, and Cromwell's own consolidation of power, became deadly. He knew what the king wanted: a way out. Anne was no longer the bright flame Henry had pursued for years. She had failed to produce a son. She had a sharp tongue, sharp opinions, and too many enemies. And Jane Seymour, demure, soft-spoken, and uncontroversial, now had the king's eye. The trial was a spectacle. Held in the Tower on May 15th, Anne faced a panel of 26 peers, including her own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, as Lord High Steward. She defended herself eloquently and with dignity, denying all charges. There were no witnesses, no cross-examinations. The outcome had already been decided. All 5 men were condemned and executed. Anne's brother George was the most tragic, intelligent, refined, and loyal. On the scaffold, he recited a poem and maintained his innocence. Yet still, his head fell by the axe. Anne was sentenced to burn at the stake or beheaded, whichever the king chose. In a moment of rare mercy, or perhaps image control, Henry commuted the sentence to beheading and even imported a skilled French swordsman to ensure it was swift and clean, a small kindness amid cruelty. On May 19, 1536, Anne walked calmly to the scaffold erected on Tower Green. She wore a grey gown with ermine trim, a crimson underdress, and a cloak of dignity. In her final speech, she did not blame Henry. She upheld the king's justice and asked the crowd to pray for him. It was not fear, it was strategy, one last effort to preserve her daughter Elizabeth's future. She knelt, blindfolded, and said simply, "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul, Lord Jesus, receive my soul." Then, with a single stroke, it was over. Less than 24 hours later, Henry was betrothed to Jane Seymour. 11 days after Anne's execution, they were married. It was as if she had never existed, a queen erased, rewritten as a warning. But Anne Boleyn was more than a fallen wife. She was a woman who challenged the rules of her time, and paid the highest price for it. In death, she became more powerful than in life. A symbol of ambition, a victim of power, and a queen whose ghost would haunt the throne for centuries. Anne Boleyn died branded a traitor, her name blackened, her body buried in an unmarked grave within the Tower walls. But from the ashes of her downfall, something extraordinary rose. Just 17 years later, the daughter she died believing she had failed to produce, Elizabeth I, would ascend the throne and become one of the most legendary monarchs in history. The irony is thunderous. Anne was executed largely for not giving Henry VIII a son. But her daughter, a girl he had once declared illegitimate, became the Virgin Queen, the monarch who would stabilize a nation, resist foreign invasion, and usher in a cultural and political renaissance. Under Elizabeth's rule, England defeated the Spanish Armada, nurtured playwrights like Shakespeare, and planted the seeds of the British Empire. The child of the woman cast aside became the face of a golden age. Elizabeth never publicly spoke of her mother, but signs of quiet tribute were everywhere. She wore Anne's ring, a hidden locket ring containing her mother's miniature portrait, until the day she died. She elevated many of the Boleyn family's allies to positions of influence. And most symbolically, she ruled with a strength and independence that echoed Anne's fierce spirit. Anne's legacy is more than Elizabeth's reign. It's also in the questions she forced England to confront. What makes a queen? What makes a woman dangerous? She had no army, no inherited power, and yet she upended the church, redefined the monarchy, and became a political and religious earthquake in her own right. Her story was twisted for centuries. Branded a seductress, a witch, a schemer. Historians, mostly male, reduced her to the woman who lured a king and then lost his love. But over time, the truth cut through. Anne wasn't destroyed because she was weak, she was destroyed because she was powerful. She refused to be used, refused to be silenced, and refused to follow the rules of what a woman, and especially a queen, was meant to be. That defiance cost her everything. But it also made her unforgettable. Today, Anne Boleyn stands as a symbol of female ambition, intellect, and the high price of stepping beyond your time. Her story still resonates, because centuries later, women are still punished for power, still judged for their boldness, still told to be quiet when they were born to speak. Anne didn't live to see her impact. But she changed the course of history. Not just because of what she did, but because of who came after her, a daughter who turned disgrace into dynasty, and fire into a legacy. This marked the dawn of the Elizabethan era, a powerful legacy born from Anne Boleyn's courage, sacrifice, and unyielding spirit. Do you think you'd have the courage to defy a king and risk everything like Anne did? Would you fight for your power and beliefs, even if it meant paying the ultimate price? Tell us your thoughts down below. We're curious how far you'd go. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, the simple, easy and free way to support us is by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to tap the bell icon. This way you take control of what you watch instead of letting the algorithm decide for you. See you in the next story.